to the book of Proverbs. The book of Proverbs, and we'll take this week and we'll look at another lesson on the family, and then we'll take a couple or 3 weeks and we'll deal with some Christmas themes and some end of the year themes in Sunday school, but we'll go back to the book of Proverbs this morning. All right, book of Proverbs. Again, my burden for the family. We know that the family is under attack and has been going all the way back to the Garden of Eden. And what are we seeing even this week in the news, the headlines? The Supreme Court is considering a case. It's hard to believe that we are at a place in America where there is actually debate about boys being girls and girls being boys, and literally hormone treatments being given to little boys and little girls, and basically mutilation type surgeries to try to pretend that a child is the opposite gender. Literally going before the Supreme Court because the Biden-Harris administration has used as their pawns certain parents and transgender children to attack a Tennessee law, which is simply trying to protect children from mutilating surgeries, experimental drugs, lifelong repercussions. And literally they are arguing over the definition of the word sex because the Biden-Harris administration is trying to upset God's divine creative order for male and female. So they're literally trying to argue as to what the word sex means. So according to the Biden-Harris administration, sex can mean basically anything that you want it to mean, because you can be whatever you want to be, because your gender, your sexual orientation, your self-expression can be whatever you want, right? So a figure skater wins a medal at a recent competition, and she calls herself a pansexual. And then a Hollywood star comes out and she identifies as a non-masculine transgender. What does that mean? Where are we at, right? We're dealing with this because we have gotten away from God's creative design, going all the way back to Genesis 1. Male and female created he them. What God hath joined together, let no man put asunder. And of course, God brought Adam and Eve together in holy matrimony. And he said, leave father and mother and cleave, leave and cleave. And we have seen the attack on the family, as we've talked about already, as early as Genesis 3. Of course, Eve being deceived, Adam followed in the deception, and of course he blamed Eve. Eve blamed the serpent, and then by a few chapters later, Lamech is involved in polygamy, and of course we know Cain murdered Abel, and so on and so forth. So we as believers, we need to continue to uphold God's ideal. We want to aim for the bullseye. We know that there is sin. We know that there is grace. We know there is forgiveness. But again, I want to help all of our families across the board. I want to help our young people from single adults all the way down, or all the way up to husbands and wives who have been married 50 plus years. And we have at least 4 in our church family that have been married more than 50 years. And Kelly and I, Lord willing, by the grace of God, next year will get halfway to that 50 years, as we are looking to celebrate our 25th wedding anniversary next July. But the book of Proverbs has a lot to say about the home. We've spent some time going through already several of these, from husband and wife to mother and father. I won't go through each and every one, but just for review, we went through several principles from the book of Proverbs regarding the husband and wife, and then also specifically to women, and of course the Proverbs 31 principles, and then looking ahead also to the capable wife from Proverbs 31, and I want to move through these because I want to get to the next slide, and then I want to try to finish, if I can, here in this lesson today before we go to some Christmas themes the next couple of weeks. We talked about men and fathers, a father giving instruction, correcting his children, obviously in a biblically balanced way, not out of wrath. Ephesians 6 warns about provoking our children to wrath. Obviously, he corrects his children in a way that is biblically balanced and appropriate, finds joy in his children living righteously, sets a good example for his children, desires a close relationship with his children, and then stays away from the immoral woman. So we spent some time last week. I believe the next slide, yes, has to do with sexual sin, and we worked through those last week, and I won't go back and rehearse all of those. But we see the grave danger in our culture with the sexual liberation and all of the ways now in which self-expression is sexual expression of various perverted, wicked kinds. And we are warned throughout the book of Proverbs and in various other passages of Scripture regarding this sin and how it is in 1 Corinthians 6, it is a sin against the body. And you can see the principles, even the physical danger that it can bring, the social disgrace, how many court cases, how many multi-million-dollar lawsuits, sometimes women coming back years later and suing a professional player, and they end up in the court of law. And sometimes these court cases between Hollywood stars, they're on TV and they're in the headlines, and you don't even want to know some of the stuff that they have to deal with in the courtroom. It's a disgrace. It's a shame to speak of those things that are done in secret, right? Ephesians says, and yet now it's out there. And Proverbs talks about sexual immorality being like taking water and dumping it in the streets. Now that's a powerful illustration when we think of a desert environment, a semi-arid environment. I remember being in Kenya, and you did not waste water. You put a bucket underneath the spigot. We just turn the shower on and let it run until it gets hot, right? You do not do that. At least when I was in Kenya, you do not just turn the water on and let it run and go down the drain. You put a bucket, and when the water gets warm, you jump in, you get your shower, and you get out, and that bucket that you used to get the water warm, it goes out to the shamba. It goes out to the garden, because you don't mess around with water. You don't waste it. You take care of every drop you possibly can. And in those days, nowadays, we have all kinds of modern purification systems. We have a well out here, but we even know in Tippecanoe County how important water is when Boone County is trying to ship water, and there's people affected by their wells and how much water they're going to be pumping out, and how's it going to affect the groundwater? We know how important water is. Well, think about it in a desert, semi-arid environment where they didn't have a lot of water. To take good water and dump it in the streets, that is foolish. That is wasteful. And Proverbs uses that analogy. Sexual immorality is like taking good water in a desert environment and dumping it, wasting it. It's like streams of water in the streets. So we spent some amount of time looking at that last week. Any comments or questions so far? No? Okay. This quote here, I found this years ago, and this kind of shows where maybe we would call progressive America, liberal America, what the view of the family is by whatever you want to call them. It's not, sadly, this view is not just in progressives and liberals anymore. Sadly, it has crept into the church, into broader evangelicalism. The ideal American family, a father and a mother bound to each other by legal marriage, raising children bound to them by biology, is a stubborn relic, a national symbol that has yet to be retired as threadbare and somewhat unrealistic. This is Salon magazine, salon.com, 2001. Where were we in 2015 with the Obergefell decision? Again, if Christians are not holding up God's standard when it comes to the home and family, then no wonder Obergefell in 2015. No wonder we're where we're at with literally parents taking their children to doctors, surgeons to mutilate their bodies and put them on hormone treatments and to subjugate them to medical treatment for the rest of their lives. And you even have over in the United Kingdom a transgender clinic that's shut down because they said this is ridiculous what we're doing. We're taking kids with autism and we're cutting off healthy body parts and pumping them full of hormones and sterilizing their bodies and causing their bone density to decrease and causing them to lose their eyesight. And then we're saying, come back every so often and pay us money so we can treat you for the rest of your life with a chronic illness that we say is healing you. Since when has being male and female been a disease? Since when has pregnancy been a poison? But that's where we're at, to the point that in 2001, a major magazine, again, I know it's along the progressive liberal line, but literally saying that children bound by parents, according to biology, that's a relic. You go to the museum and you look at that and you brush off the dust, because that kind of thing, we're beyond that now. We've evolved. And that's where some of this evolution stuff has taken us, right? We've evolved. We have progressed. We have iPhone 2552 and the Samsung 655. So we are smarter now. We don't need all this old 2,000-year-old book. It's an old relic. Right? That's the way the world talks. And sadly, it's crept into churches, into evangelicalism. You don't have to go far, sadly, even in our own greater Lafayette area, and you can see churches that advertise specifically for the perverted. Not saying that those people don't need the gospel. Of course they need the gospel. But to openly celebrate sin and affirm sin, no church should ever be doing that. But sadly, there are churches that have given up the Bible. Duke, not that Duke has ever been a bastion of gospel, but I guess the Duke Divinity School, for whatever worth Duke Divinity School has been, but I guess there's a intellectual Duke professor, scholar, who like 20 years ago wrote a book with his son, or he wrote a book 20 years ago and defended traditional marriage, and now he just recently published a book, and with his son, he has said that God has progressed. And we have a God today that now accepts a wide range of family arrangements. And he's now published this book, and he's a well-known author who 20 years ago or so was defending traditional marriage, and now he and his son have written a book and have published it and are saying God has progressed. What he said in the Bible, he doesn't intend for that to be the case today. It's crazy. So that is why now people are saying this is unrealistic. We cannot think that way. We cannot buy into those lies. As hard as it can be, as challenging as it can be, and we'll talk a little bit about this, especially in today's technology where our children have to bear the weight of 1,000 headlines because there's phones and exposure to who knows what due to the technology. It's difficult parenting these days. It's challenging. And we know it's the hardest and the best job all at the same time. I don't want us to give up on God's order. And what God has ordered, what God has designed, what God has commanded, what does he say? He says that he has given us the power by his grace if we obey. Doesn't mean that everything's going to be perfect. Of course not. Doesn't mean there aren't going to be sin and consequences, but there is biblical success if we follow God's order. And again, it doesn't mean that there isn't sin, that there isn't fault and failure, that there aren't consequences, but we are thankful for his grace and for his forgiveness. But again, let's continue to uphold what God has designed and has put in his word. So for children, really quickly, a wise son makes a father glad. I think this is important. Proverbs 16 and verse 31, I think it's important for us to teach our children to respect the elderly. The hoary head is a crown of glory if it be found in the way of righteousness. I'd like to also apply not just the hoary head, but the bald head is a crown of glory, right? But the point is that there's to be respect for those who have gone before. And we live in a culture that if it's old, it's bad. If it's new, it's good, right? And this whole progressivism. It's important, I think, from a very young age that we teach our children to respect their elders. And not that every elder is a good example or is morally upright, but there's still a respect. And I think that applies even at school, even if the teacher, we've had to work through situations with our own children, with teachers who are a little older, probably beyond their retirement years. They probably should have retired. And I remember having to go to a teacher who taught me. I remember one of my first years as a school administrator, I had to go to, with Pastor Arrowwood, a teacher who taught me in 4th grade and 6th grade. And we had to sit down and we had to ask him to turn in his resignation to retire because he could not. But he needed somebody to come and sit down with him and say, it's time. And he agreed. He just didn't know how to do it. He was struggling. We all knew it. Another teacher we had to do the same thing with. It was hard. Those are just in a professional type of environments. But what about with just in church and around the school and in public and different places? I think it's important. If there's the old lady or the old man trying to get into the restaurant or into the store, should the little kids be running, closing the door on them, cutting them off? What should we do? We should tell our kids to stand back, right? And let them hold the door for them. Give them, it's a respect. It's a sign of respect. It's just something that I think that we have lost in our culture. It goes all the way back to the Mosaic Law, Leviticus 19. A foolish son is a grief to his father. Much heartache when a daughter rebels and creates a heartache that is a grief, and no parent wants to go through that. A son needs to keep his father's commandments. A wise son receives his father's instruction. That means he not just hears it, but he receives it, he applies it. A wise son turns away from error. Again, these apply to son and daughter. Son, of course, Solomon's writing in the context specifically to his son. I think, Doug, you mentioned Bible study yesterday. Can you imagine being Rehoboam and reading the book of Proverbs and then knowing what Rehoboam did? But the fact that he's saying son, of course, this applies to a daughter as well. Son and father need a close relationship. A wise son contributes to his father's testimony. And it is ultimately up to the child to choose or reject wisdom. Proverbs 29 and verse number 3. Whoso loveth wisdom rejoiceth his father, but he that keepeth company with harlots spendeth his substance. Now I want to go back and I want to make sure, I'm going to clarify something here. And I should have made a better note in my notes here. But Proverbs 22 and verse 15, foolishness is bound in the heart of a child, but the rod of correction shall drive it far from him. And then Proverbs 22 and verse 6, train up a child in the way he should go. When he is old, he will not depart from it. Okay? So on the next slide, I want us to understand that there is the time and place for the rod. And I believe that does include corporal punishment, spanking. I'm not saying it always has to be spanking, especially as the kids get older. I'm saying, of course, that spanking needs to be done the right way. I do believe in corporal punishment. I'm a product of corporal punishment. I'm thankful. I didn't so much like it at the time, but I'm thankful now. And I deserved probably more. But the rod, again, it's not always corporal punishment. It's not always spanking. And I do think that there is a place and I'm going to say it again, I've said it before, but there's nerve units down here, nerve endings down here that go here, that reach here, if you know what I mean, okay? And as a matter of fact, I believe it's in Proverbs 23, those who neglect the rod can literally take their child or lead their child to hell, to death, to destruction. It's the lack of discipline. It's the lack of boundaries. It's the lack of, I'm not saying just heap rule after rule after rule. That's not what I'm saying. But the lack of discipline, the lack of boundaries, actually leaves a child to do his own thing, for the depravity of his or her heart to come out. Okay, so the rod is a way to wisdom in a child who doesn't respond properly to that. It can be a very hard way of life. So let's continue. It does drive foolishness from the child. A child left to himself brings shame. Proverbs 29 and verse 15. The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself bringeth his mother to shame. Again, I have too many illustrations, being in school administration, being in the ministry, but I have seen way too many grandparents having to raise their grandchildren because the moms and dads were so derelict. I was shocked sometimes at how many grandparents are now raising their grandchildren because the moms and dads are literally drug addicts and AWOL. And the hurt that I would see in a child's life, and especially when a mom or a dad who's not doing right would come for a little while and then go right back into the sin, and it just, the way it disrupts a child's life, I mean, it's heartbreaking. But a child who's just given everything, spoiled brat, never disciplined, never given boundaries, never taught the why for those rules and those boundaries. Rules without relationship breed rebellion. You still have to have a relationship, even where there are rules, there are boundaries. They've done studies. Children who are given a recess with no fence, with no boundaries, they struggle to play. You put a fence, you put boundaries, and you send the kids out, they play. It's really interesting if you've ever seen the study. You give a child boundaries, it's actually part of God's creative order and design. They have to have boundaries, but there has to be with relationship, especially as they get older. You have to do more of the why. This is the reason why. Here's because. And it has to come with relationship. Too many parents, they just hand them a phone and say, well, whatever will be, que sera, sera. You know, I had a parent who literally told me that. He's like, well, nothing I can do. It's his destiny. I'm thinking, what is your call as God, from God as a parent? You are to do everything you can by the grace of God, obviously biblically informed, and we all make mistakes, but to just leave him to himself, that's not right. Character is grown through proper training and instruction. It's not always corporal punishment. It's coaching, it's counseling, it's coming alongside, it's taking time. We've spent some time on this already. Child training has to start early. I don't know how many times my mom and dad through the years would say, it's got to start early. You can't wait till they're 13. Especially with all of the influences today that are at literally their fingertips. You can't start at 13. Yes?
Yeah, when we had our very first child, she couldn't even walk yet, and we did not child-proof our home.
Yeah, it's a great point.
She would be crawling, and she would get close to an outlet or the plug, and we would pull her away and tell her no.
Yep.
And then she'd crawl back, and then we'd slap her hand lightly and
Yeah.
tell her no, and she'd go back again. We'd slap her hand a little harder. She figured out no.
Yeah.
Was equated with
Exactly.
Something she shouldn't do, and if she continued doing it, there'd be discomfort for her.
Yes.
And at that point, like I said, it starts early. They learn at such an early age that you don't have to be very severe later in life.
Correct.
Because they learn that very early.
Yeah, and thankfully we were taught the same thing when our children were being born. We first started having children. We were taught the same thing. Don't just take everything off of the coffee table and off all the shelves and lock all the cabinets. You lock certain ones. You don't want to be wrong one time about certain things. So we had a couple cabinets that we locked. Other than that, they were told. And yeah, you're right. We didn't just take everything away. We had to gradually teach them that no meant don't touch, no meant no, right? And so there's principles even in how you give them boundaries, but you teach them why in a sense even early on. It's a good point. And then children and their parents should bring honor to each other. Proverbs 17 in verse number 6. Proverbs 17 in verse number 6. And again, in Ephesians, honor thy father and thy mother. Exodus 20 in the Ten Commandments, honor thy father and thy mother. Obedience may only last until they're out of your house, but honor is for a lifetime. Proverbs 17 and verse 6, children's children are the crown of old men. The glory of children are their fathers. Wow, what a joy to see your children walk in truth. And parents should honor the children. The temptation when a husband and wife, when a child gets married, they're husband and wife now, what's the temptation? Call mom and dad about every little problem and issue, right? And as parents, we have to fight that urge to get involved. And next thing you know, they're choosing sides and pitting in-law versus outlaw, in-law versus in-law, and becoming an outlaw. And daughter is now going to mom and complaining about husband, and now she's ganging up on, you know what I'm saying? We've got to be so careful as parents as they become adults that in some ways, we've seen parents and grandparents now aiding and abetting their children in sin. That's a tough line. That's a hard line sometimes as to where, but I remember my dad telling me, you have a child out of wedlock? Sometimes my dad would say it, I'm sorry, but my dad would say it, keep your pants zipped up, okay? Because we are not taking care of your child. We're not raising your child. My dad would say stuff like that. And I'm sorry to be a little crass, but it was a point that it helped me at an early age. I told you about my dad told me when Magic Johnson retired, and we had a little talk on the way home from that Target parking lot. And he said, you do right. You stay pure because you never know. And anyway, but honoring each other. One of the greatest honors, right, is to have grandkids and to have them come over to your house and spend time with them and go shopping and go on trips. And what a joy. We haven't experienced that yet. Lord willing, we'll have grandchildren one day and experience that. But there is great joy in grandchildren. Yes. I'm going to wait my time. I still have children in the home, so let me wait. Thanks for the offer, though. All right. Any other comments or questions? Okay, someone gave me this a long time ago, or I came across this, thought this was good. I'll just share this really quickly here. You live with criticism, you learn to condemn. You live with hostility, you learn to fight. Live with pity, you learn to feel sorry for yourself. Live with encouragement, you learn to be confident. Live with fairness, you learn what justice is. Live with honesty, you learn what truth is. Live with friendliness, you learn to make friends. Live with love, you learn to express it. Live with Christ in first place, you learn to cherish Christ. Yes, Camilla? Mm. Yes. 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 Keep your eyes on the Lord and not be unequally yoked together, and be careful. Yeah. Yes. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Thank you for sharing that. All right, and then one more thing, and then we'll move on to the next slide, but I believe it's in Proverbs 22, verse number 6, train up a child in the way he should go. When he is old, he will not depart from it. I want to clarify something. I believe this verse, because Proverbs often deals with truths, But because of sin, there are exceptions in a sense. This doesn't mean that the truth isn't still true. It just means that there are people, because of sin, because of the effects of sin in our lives and choices that we make, that there are consequences that don't result in everything that Proverbs says is true for those who obey. So, truism. It is truth, but again, it's not always applied or obeyed, and because of sin, there are various results. So, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. I like to say it is descriptive and not prescriptive. So, what I mean is, you don't just follow a recipe, pour in all the ingredients, bake your children for 18 years, and boom, they come out as the best, perfect, most wonderful child. Doesn't happen, does it? They still make their own choices. At some point, they're taking ownership. And there are some children who are raised in good Christian homes, and you've seen children from the same home, one go one way and one go the other. At some point, they are still responsible before God to make their own choices and to take ownership. So I like to use Proverbs 22:6. I've often heard it, honestly, growing up. I often heard, you will get the magical child. You will get this wonderful child if you just follow this recipe. And then I got, I don't know how far into parenting, and I realized, wait a second here. I have yet to find a recipe other than the Bible, and God gives us His Holy Spirit, and we have to apply, and we make mistakes, and especially as our kids have gotten older and becoming adults, I'm learning a whole new level of parenting, you know. But we have to understand this is descriptive. This is the goal. This is our aim. This is by the grace of God what we desire and we strive for by His grace and through obedience and application. But we make mistakes along the way. We have to ask God for forgiveness. Go to our own kids sometimes and ask for forgiveness. Sometimes we have to say, Daddy, Mommy did it wrong. We didn't do it the right way. Don't follow and don't do what I did. This is why I'm warning you. Sometimes that's not a pleasant conversation because we have to admit to some of our failures in an area. And those are hard conversations. But we're saying now, I don't want you to do what I did and have the consequences I did. But does that make sense? Questions or comments on that? Yes, Carl?
Well, I think that when it says that they will not depart from it, I don't think that means that they're going to become a Christian and
Not necessarily.
that, to me, it means that they have that knowledge.
Yes.
Taught them that knowledge.
Yes.
That knowledge will not depart from them.
Correct. That's a great point.
It's their
Yes.
choice to follow it or not.
That's a great point. You've given them the truth by God's grace to the best of your ability, not perfect, and yet they are still responsible for that truth. That's a great point. Thank you for that. Yeah. Any other comments? Okay. Another quote. This is, I pulled this off of a Dave Ramsey post. I like some of his stuff. We've taken our kids through financial peace. There's high school courses. We used to have the courses taught at our Christian high school. They have financial peace for high schoolers. I like a lot of his stuff. But anyway, he had this quote online. William A. Galston, former deputy assistant for domestic policy to U.S. President Bill Clinton, spent decades analyzing poverty data. His conclusion: to give yourself the best chance of success, do three things. Graduate high school, wait until you're 20 to have children, and marry before you have your first child. Now, that's natural law, okay? That's just natural law. Even unsaved people recognizing, society would be better if children would do these things. Well, Ben Carson under President Trump in his previous administration, Ben Carson would say this kind of stuff as HUD secretary, and the liberal media just annihilated him. How dare you talk like that? What's his name? Rahm Emanuel up here in Chicago years ago, after another shootout, mass shooting in Chicago, he came out and said, where are the fathers? Where are the dads? We got to start addressing the need for dads doing right in their homes and being there for their children and leading their kids. And he said it obviously in an unsaved natural man kind of way. And the liberal media came out and they just about took him and threw him into Lake Michigan. How dare you talk like, and that's Rahm Emanuel was nowhere close to any kind of Christian conservative position. And even he said it, and then he got shut up, for what he said. But this is even unsaved natural man recognizing a biblical principle. Yes.
Well, you remember how Dan Quayle got treated.
Oh yeah, the whole Murphy Brown thing. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and there was just a big anniversary of that episode, and it was in the news. And I listened to a podcast where they talked about that, and they talked about how it revealed a cultural shift. That everybody now is, not everybody of course, but a lot of people now are okay with premarital sex and having a child out of wedlock. And Dan Quayle was mocked to scorn. Yeah. Here's a resource, renewanation.org. I like a lot of their stuff. They're a biblical worldview. They're very, very, very biblical. I use some of their stuff at our Christian school. But if you need some resource, there's not a lot of resources for grandparents. Not a lot of good biblical resources for grandparents. They have several, and this is one that was fairly inexpensive, $20, Discipling Your Grandchildren, Equipping Grandparents. And I can recommend Renew a Nation. They're good. They're very biblical. And again, I use some of their stuff at our Christian school. But if you need some grandparenting resources, I think renewanation.org is a place that you could go, and they have several. But this is one I thought I'd pass along. All right, we don't have a lot of time. This is a bigger topic than can be addressed in 10 or 15 minutes. But let's talk about technology and the family, okay? And this is a tough topic. I'm a digital immigrant. We have digital natives in our midst here. Some of you were born with a phone in your hand. I'm just joking, of course. But you grew up, from the time you were born, the internet has been a thing. Most of us in this room are digital immigrants. We entered into the digital world from the outside. We weren't born with it. Now, we've joked. There was a joke online the other day about how tough it is to be a Gen Zer, because we started off with VHS, and then we had to buy all of our videos as DVDs. Then we had to turn around and we had to buy them all as Blu-rays, and now we have to take and buy them all again as digital, right? On digital streaming. It was just a joke. And then somebody brought up, we were talking about this, and somebody brought up, well, what about 8-tracks and tape cassettes? And then it went to CDs, and now it's digital streaming services, right? And some of the young people are like, tape players? 8-tracks? Anyway, technology. We have advanced in technology, but does that always make us better? I'd have to say that as technology has advanced, we've become more immoral. It's interesting. It's interesting when you look at some of the statistics and you see some of the advances in technology. When you really dig down, like Barna and some of these other survey groups, it's interesting. They show some of these lines of the increases in technology in digital media, and they show the decline in church attendance, in morality, in ethics, moral ethics. It's really interesting, the parallels, okay? It's not all causation, it's a correlation, okay? I had a roommate, he was in our prayer group, he was in our discipleship group, so he was next door to us. And he said, I got saved out of a rock music culture. He said, I loved my heavy metal rock music. And he said, the reason why I loved it so much is because, and he explained some of his background, and he was he had a temper problem. He had an anger problem, and he knew it, and God had worked on him, and he was doing much, much better. But he said, I loved my rock music because it identified with my anger. He said, I could go to my rock music, and he said, I could have all those feelings. He said, and it just identified with me. And so I could have my expression through my rock music. I thought, wow, that's interesting. Media, the power of media. Focus on the Family just had an excellent, excellent article on music. Now, they're not quite where we're at. I would go a little further. Call me an old fogey, but I know I have conservative music convictions, okay? But Focus on the Family talked about the effect of music on our culture. It's a great article. I saved it. I'd be happy to share it. I think they missed the mark just a little bit, but overall, they made a very good point. And they said, when this particular group was number one on the charts, this is where morals were at. This particular group pushed it this further, and look at where the morals are at. And they went through and they named groups, and they went on and they actually stepped into a very dangerous territory. And I'm actually going to say this person's name, and I know I'm going to get hate mail. But Taylor Swift, they actually named her and said, why is it that she is a goddess? I'm using now my own terms. Why is she a goddess to society? Where has music, and now look at where culture is at. Interesting, very fascinating. But now we have portals to every part of the world with the phone. Is a phone neutral? Now, are the parts, is the metal and the titanium and the individual parts, can they be neutral? Sure, but do you think Samsung and Apple and Google, do you think they make the phones with particular things in mind? Why is it that the better cameras, at least in years past, why is it that the better cameras are for the selfies? Do you think that's neutral? Is that a neutral statement when they make the better cameras facing us for our selfies? I mean, we can go on and on. Aren't there algorithms that help keep certain types of content coming our way? I get disgusted. I have a certain amount of social media, but I try to limit it. It gets overwhelming. When it comes to communication, I can't do the big five. I don't have enough time. I can't send a certain group Instagram messages, another group Snap messages, another group email, another group text messages, and then another group Facebook. I can't. I try to limit to 2 or 3 if I can do that and post some things. But there are some people, all they use for communication is direct messaging with like Instagram, or all they do is Snap. And some of you are like, Snap? But there's so many, and then there's Telegram and WhatsApp. Is the phone neutral? I think we have to say it's not. There are certain ways in which it is made, certain algorithms, and how there's access. The stores, Google Play Store, the Apple Play Store, are there not things in there that you can hide from your parents? I don't know how many kids I met through school who they weren't allowed to have internet access, but they had social media accounts because they would borrow their friend's phone. They go over to their parents' house or their friend's house, and I mean, it's just how much screen time. I think we ought to consider off times. It's a hard thing. It's a challenge. But I think there needs to be off times. Parents, you have to make that decision as to how much and where and when, whether it's overnight. I know now phones more and more are alarm clocks. Phones now are necessary for apps, for work. Our kids, most of us, we don't have landlines now because who wants a landline? You have a phone, a cell phone, right? Well, when our kids started jobs or started driving, we had to make a decision about a cell phone and a smartphone and how much access and what kind of filters and timing and all that. And then we found out that in order to communicate with their managers at work, they had to have an app. And that app is only available on a smartphone. And that's the only way they can communicate with their job. Their manager is not going to text you and call you. They're going to use that app as their only means of communication. Everybody has to go to that app. And more now, that's the way it is. You have to have an app for just about everything. You have to have an app to open up your home. You have to have an app to turn your stove on, an app to to open the refrigerator. You have an app. Gianna was telling me there's a refrigerator, a smart refrigerator. You can have an app on your phone for your refrigerator. Incredible. I think our washing machine is a smart washing machine. I've never set up the app. So I've never even used it. But anyway, I use my washing machine, but I don't use the app. When should a child have a smartphone? How soon should they have social media? We put limits as far as when, but I think that there ought to be accountability and access. I think parents ought to have access to their children's phones. I know that's like breaking into Fort Knox, but you can go to federal prison if you're a parent and you actually go into your parents' or your child's phone. My parents, they had access to my closet, my bedroom. Now, obviously, there was privacy, but my mom and dad, they're like, we pay for this roof. We can go to your bedroom. And they did. Yes, Camilla? Yeah. At the library, she couldn't get into her child's records? Wow. 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 It's incredible, the technology and the limitations. Instagram finally came out with some parental controls. Wow, it only took them like 15, 20 years to figure out that. I mean, when the United States Surgeon General is saying we have a problem when 16-year-old girls are suffering from loneliness and anxiety and mental health illness because of social media, and he specifically said, the United States Surgeon General specifically said 16-year-old girls need to get off social media. It is damaging their psyche because all they're doing is comparing constantly. This girl's got a better body. She's got a better dress. She can wear this. She's got this boyfriend. And the comparisons are wearing the girls out. Now, it's boys, too. Boys have to be careful, too. It's mostly sports cars and who's got the best-looking girl. And boys deal with it, too. But the girls, they were literally, the Surgeon General was warning about social media. And there's social media nonprofits who are petitioning government to put some more restrictions. I think Australia just did something because it's so bad over there. What about our example? Are we too much on our phones, too much screen time? Are we ignoring our kids and our relationships? And then again, the focus should be on relationships, conversations, quality, and quantity time. I close with this slide, and I know this is maybe I'll come back and do a whole series. I've got a lot of research and understanding to do. This book has been a help to me. It's a lot to go through, a lot of statistics and numbers, but you can pull out some good stuff. And it's one of those where you have to go in, you have to kind of figure out what works best for you, but he's got some really, really good principles. The basic overall principles: choose wisdom and courage, emphasize active engagement and creative skill, and take time for worship, for rest, for meditation. And what he is saying is easy is not always better. Just because it's on an app, just because it's right there at your fingertips, it's not always better. Easy isn't always better. Convenient isn't always going to build character. We are so, accustomed to convenience, comfort, and casual, when comfort, convenience, and casual are not always the best thing for us. We have to go through the process. We have to sometimes engage to be able to really know and learn and grow. And active engagement, eye-to-eye contact, physical presence, not just digital, physical presence, creative skill. What can we do to enhance creative skill, and especially in relationships? And taking time off at meals, at night, whatever it is, setting up boundaries for worship, of course, for church, for rest, for meditation. I know some people, they can sit there with their phones now and they can pretend to be on their Bible app and never hear a word of the message of the lesson, and they can be watching the football game. Shame on us. If we can't even set aside our phones long enough. I don't even like to have my devotions on my tablet or my phone. Now, I'll do it, but it's a temptation, right? To do what? If you're on your tablet or your phone, having your Bible app, reading your devotions, a notification pops up, The temptation is to go to some social media or whatever. Next thing you know, half an hour later, you've not spent any quality time with God. It's there. Access.org, A Parent's Ultimate Guide to Smartphones. It's really good. You can find it. I have a copy of it. And then Jonathan Morrow, I don't know a lot about him, but I did listen to some of the podcast, and what I heard was really good. It's about $59, but he has a whole course on a guide for Christian parents on smartphones, and that's the website. Just some things to think about when it comes to technology, because honestly, it's a whole new era, isn't it, for us as parents, and even for us as adults, with our children, and for us personally as adults, how to manage the phones, how much, and there's access to all kinds of things now. 3 clicks and they can be in some really bad places. So we need to make sure that even the Word of God is applied to this area. Phones don't get an exemption, do they? Every area of our life has to be submitted to the Word of God. All right, closing comments or questions? Gary?
Just food for thought. There's a restaurant, a small family restaurant in Warsaw, Indiana, has a sign up on the wall. It says, "Sorry, no Wi-Fi available. Talk to each other."
Family restaurant in Warsaw, Indiana, and it says, "No Wi-Fi, talk to each other." That's good. I like that. Excellent. All right, we're out of time. Let's close in prayer. Thanks for being here this morning, and we'll get ready for the service. Lord, thank you for your word. Help us to apply these truths. Help us, Lord, to have godly homes. Help us, Lord, to forgive one another. And Lord, may we be submissive to your word and be recipients of your grace as we work through some of these things. Thank you for the principles, the commands, the promises of your word that we can apply to help us as parents, as children, in our homes. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. We'll get ready for the service to